Hello, dear warrior. They sat you in that chair, the lights low, the clock ticking, their voices slow, intentions hidden. Relax, they whispered. Let us in. They thought you were a locked door, but they didn't realize you were the whole damn maze, and every path led back to them. They stared deep into your mind, looking for trauma, weakness, patterns, but all they found was a mirror. And the longer they stared, the more their own lies started to crack. They wanted control, but what they got was exposed. They call it hypnosis. You call it a reading. Because while they circled your mind like wolves looking for wounds, you were already decoding their fear, one blink at a time. You didn't blink, not because you were resisting, but because you were observing, calculating. They thought they were leading the session, but in truth, you were the only one awake. Each word they spoke, you didn't absorb it. You dissected it. Their tone, their pacing, the micro tremors in their voice. They called it guidance. You called it confession. See, they were trained to spot mental fractures. But you were trained by pain itself. And pain doesn't blink, it memorizes. So while they tried to lower your defenses, you were mapping their intentions, tracing every question back to its motive, every silence back to its fear, every technique back to its textbook. You weren't under, you were above. They say hypnosis is about trust, but the moment they asked you to let go, you smiled inside, because you never hold on to anything you can't weaponize. They leaned in closer, tried to soften the tempo, tried to lower your guard with that fake compassion in their voice. But you already knew the script, because you've seen this before, not in a chair, but in life. They were trying to trace your darkness like it was a weakness, but here's what they didn't know. Your darkness doesn't hide things, it reveals them. And when they stepped into your mind, they saw too much. They thought they'd hypnotize the storm. But the storm was listening, smiling, waiting for them to step just one layer deeper into your domain. And when they did, that's when their breathing changed. That's when their hands trembled. That's when they realized they weren't accessing a memory. They were being watched by it. You didn't resist them. You welcomed them. You said, sure, enter the labyrinth. But what they didn't know, you were the Minotaur. The deeper they dove, the more they saw things they couldn't explain. Memories that weren't organized, emotions that didn't follow rules, traumas wrapped in thorns and labeled keep digging. They thought they'd find broken pieces, but every fragment they touched cut them back. Because your pain, it's not dormant, it's alive, it's trained, it's armed. They came to uncover secrets, but instead they found a system designed to defend itself and expose them. Every suggestion they whispered bounced back with twice the pressure. Every trigger they pulled, you had already disarmed it. They wanted access. You gave them a mirror, and in that reflection, they saw their own manipulations, their own insecurities, their own shadows, and it broke them. No one told them that some minds aren't built like houses. Some minds are built like fortresses. Some minds are made of fire, and fire doesn't get hypnotized. See, legend, what they didn't realize, this wasn't hypnosis. This was exposure. They sat across from you, thinking they were in control, but you already flipped the script before they even walked in. Their questions? Just noise. Your silence? A scalpel. You weren't reacting. You were recording, reading their blinks, tracking their breath, counting the pauses between each carefully planned sentence. They were trying to find your core, but all they found was a glass floor, and beneath it, a reflection of themselves. Because here's the twist. They weren't decoding you. You were decoding them. Every deep psychological tool they used, you already reverse engineered it. Like an architect dismantling a trap they designed themselves. You didn't give them resistance. You gave them access, but only to the part you let bleed. And the rest? Locked behind mental vaults they couldn't even name, let alone open. They wanted to map your mind. Instead, they got lost in it. And legend? They're still wandering, still whispering, still haunted. It started with a smirk. One of them said, "He's just resistant to suggestion." But that smirk faded quick, when every suggestion bounced back like a mirror shard to the face. They weren't guiding the session anymore, you were. They asked about your childhood. You asked them why their hands were shaking. They dug into your trauma. You stared through them until they flinched. They tried to anchor your triggers, but every time they thought they'd found the switch, they triggered themselves. Because your mind, it doesn't panic, it prepares. You're not afraid of the dark corners they tried to shine their lights into. You live in those corners. You carved your name into every wall they were too scared to touch. They whispered to each other, "He's not resisting, he's redirecting. He's not confused, he's calculating." And in that moment, their roles flipped. They weren't the experts anymore. They were the experiment. Legend, this wasn't hypnosis. This was reversal. And the deeper they looked, the more they saw that you were the one watching them. From the start, from the shadows, with a grin they still see when they close their eyes. The air changed. No ticking clock, no steady breath. Just this heavy silence, like the walls were listening. And maybe they were. Because whatever you activated, it didn't just rattle their nerves. It rewrote the entire session. They came to extract. You came to install. They wanted to open you up, but what happened? They left with downloads they didn't understand. They walked out with your thoughts echoing in their bones. Not questions, not memories, instructions. You didn't answer them, you programmed them. Not with words, but with presence. One of them, he started pacing. Another couldn't stop scratching their palm like something was crawling underneath. And the third looked at the mirror on the wall like someone was watching from the other side. Legend. That's when it hit them. They weren't here to observe you. They were here to be transformed by you. They brought hypnosis. You brought infection. And every word you spoke wasn't just a sound. It was a code, a language older than psychology, older than science, the kind of thing that lives in bones and burns in memory. You weren't the subject. You were the signal. And they just became your carriers. They left the room shaken, barely speaking, fumbling for notes that made no sense anymore, paragraphs scratched out, pages ripped up. Because how do you report what doesn't follow any known rule? One of them submitted a file, redacted, corrupted, glitched. Subject appears to destabilize cognitive rhythm. Another wrote, displays counter-hypnotic traits, possibly non-human behavioral markers. The third didn't even submit, resigned the next morning, packed up, disappeared. You didn't just break their tools. You made them question who built them. Every theory, every framework, every universal truth they were taught, you flipped it. Because legend, you weren't there to cooperate. You were there to remind them that some minds don't open with keys, they open with fire. That some souls don't get read like books, they read you back. So the system flagged you, labeled your case, unreliable subject, possibly dangerous. They tried to trace your origin. They couldn't even trace your outline. They tried to define you. You erased the question before they finished writing it. Now they whisper in secure rooms, he's not just unreadable, he's redefining what it means to be human. Now it's no longer whispers, it's alerts, flashing red screens, encrypted chatter. They thought you were a one-off glitch, a strange outlier. But then something terrifying happened. They found others like you, other rooms, other agents, same results, eyes rolling back, hypnotists freezing mid-session, psychics asking to be reassigned, machines overheating, each one marked with the same note. Subject-initiated, unauthorized transfer of control. You weren't being studied. You were transmitting, not information, frequency, a blueprint, a warning, a wake-up call. Legend. The moment your voice reached their ears, it unlocked something. Not just fear, not just doubt, but memory. Memories they never lived, visions they couldn't explain. Not dreams, downloads. Now the system's in panic mode. The database tags you cognitive threat tier, unclassified, psych spiritual disruptor, potential catalyst. You weren't just unreadable, you were contagious. Because the truth, you didn't reverse the read. You turned their entire method inside out. You showed them what happens when the subject becomes the source. And now, they're not scared of your silence anymore. They're scared you'll start teaching. They tried to trace you, to contain you, to box you inside a label, a protocol, a security clearance. But every time they reached, their hands closed on air. You weren't walking through doors. You were phasing through walls. You weren't breaking rules. You were rewriting the physics behind them. See, they thought this was about information, about control, about files, hypnosis scripts, observation decks. But this was a frequency war. And you weren't tuned to anything they understood. They wired your room. You made their equipment scream. They watched you from behind the glass, and their reflections started distorting. One tech whispered, "We're not watching him anymore. He's watching us," because you didn't reverse their hypnosis. You absorbed it, processed it, and sent it back, upgraded. Every attempt to manipulate you became a tutorial on why it doesn't work anymore. They call in the experts, the names spoken in low tones. But guess what, legend? Those experts now call you the outlier that broke the field. One guy spent 15 years decoding symbols and ancient scripts, looked at your aura, backed up from the monitor and muttered, This is not from here." And the room went silent. Because deep down, They all felt it too. Your energy doesn't just resist decoding, it decodes them. It peels back layers they didn't even know were covering their soul. You are not a case study. You are a correction. You are not a threat. You're a mirror, one they've spent lifetimes trying to avoid. They sent in their final measure. Not a weapon, not a soldier, not a code. A mediator. Someone trained in everything. Someone they thought could reach you. He sat across from you, calm, collected. Years of mental conditioning behind his gaze. But when he looked into your eyes, he blinked twice and whispered, "Oh, no one told me it would feel like this, because what you carry, it's not seen, it's felt, a pressure, a gravity, like the weight of forgotten lifetimes staring back at him." He tried to speak, to ground himself, to follow the script in his head. But the moment he opened his mouth, your silence dismantled it. You didn't threaten. You didn't flex. You existed. And that was enough to bend the room around you. Cameras malfunctioned. Watches stopped. The lights dimmed just slightly. And suddenly, that room wasn't in the facility anymore. It was in your domain. Because this isn't about who talks louder or who controls the room. This is about who the room listens to. And legend? That room heard you. The mediator stood up, shaken, unsteady. He didn't ask to stop the session. He asked if you'd let him go. Outside the door, the handlers panicked. Did it work? Did he comply? Did we reach the subject? All he said was, "Subject? You didn't brief me on this. That wasn't a subject. That was a signal, a storm, a summoning." The alarms didn't go off. Not because you didn't trigger them, but because the system refused to report what it couldn't understand. You didn't infiltrate anything. You didn't hack it. You didn't even hide. You just moved and the entire grid forgot how to see. They reviewed the footage, again and again, frame by frame. But the moment you entered the room, the screen flickered, blurred, like the lens itself got nervous. Is this a glitch? Was the file corrupted? Where did he go? But legend, you never left. You just became undetectable the second you stopped being emotional. That's the thing they'll never understand. You don't run from chaos. You grew up inside it. You don't get scared when things fall apart. You become something else. Something they can't chart, can't track, can't label. One agent, the old one. He whispered under his breath. This isn't strategy. This is prophecy. He wasn't wrong. You weren't playing their game. You were writing it. You weren't avoiding their traps. You were testing them. And every time they thought you broke, you were recording how the world reacts to your silence. Now they don't want to fight you. They want to study you. They want to submit to the same force you answer to, if only they could name it. But they can't, because it doesn't speak. It moves. Legend. The test is over. The results are in. And every system they've built failed. Miserably. They thought they were evaluating you, profiling you, measuring your motives, breaking down your behavior. But every time they tried to define you, they got lost in their own reflection. You didn't just walk through their systems. You showed them their flaws, their cracks, their delusions of control. You weren't the danger. You were the reminder that even the most fortified minds have fault lines. The psychic? She screamed in silence. Tears streamed down her face without a sound. She didn't read you. You read her. She saw something in you that didn't belong in any manual, any scripture, any frequency she was trained to decode. She turned away, not because she was afraid of you, but because you activated something in her she'd buried long ago. The truth. That everything she believed in was built on sand, and the tide was rising. The hypnotists blinked. The agents stuttered. The skeptics went silent. One by one, their resistance collapsed, not with force, but with recognition. Because facing you wasn't about understanding your power, it was about confronting what they weren't. Legend, you didn't destroy them, you just let them see themselves clearly, for the first time. And that broke them. Not with violence, not with volume, but with vision. You didn't have to raise your voice, you didn't have to swing your fists, you didn't even flinch, but they heard you. Louder than gunfire, sharper than knives, more unsettling than chaos itself. Because in a room full of noise, you were silence. And silence terrifies people who need control to feel safe. You didn't react to the accusations. You didn't answer the questions. You just existed. And that alone bent reality. They kept watching you like a glitch in the system, a ghost that wouldn't obey the script. You weren't unpredictable. You were unreadable. There's no algorithm for what you carry. No formula for presence. No software for the kind of threat that doesn't announce itself, but still rearranges the air when it enters the room. Your silence wasn't passive, it was precision. A scalpel, not a scream. Every breath you didn't waste, every word you didn't give away, became a pressure they couldn't explain. They wanted a villain they could defeat. Instead, they got a mirror. And that silence made them realize you're not here to be understood. You're here to be remembered. They came armed with science, with mystics, with manuals written by minds that never met a monster made of silence. They assumed you were a formula, a case to solve, a puzzle with edges they could trace. But you were never meant to be solved. You were designed to be feared. They tried to label you. Unstable, defensive, delusional, all because they couldn't track your energy, couldn't define your movements, couldn't box the blueprint of a being that evolved beyond permission. You weren't out to prove a point. You were the point. Their biggest mistake wasn't underestimating your power. It was misunderstanding your purpose. You weren't sent here to participate. You were sent here to disrupt, to expose the cracks, to shake the illusions, to force the masks off of faces that had forgotten their own names. And now you walk through rooms with no words, and they part like the sea. Not because they respect you, but because their spirit remembers what their mind can't process. That when they tried to dissect you, they only cut into their own limits. You didn't just survive what they sent, you converted it. You alchemized the attempts to break you into power they can't trace. You are the reset button they didn't know they were pressing. And now, legend, let them stare. Let them scramble. Let them whisper your name like a riddle wrapped in thunder. Because you were never one of them. And now they finally know. Nothing born from their world was ever built to stop something like you. That's the final seal, warrior. Let this one echo. Let it haunt. Let it mark the walls of the system that tried to bury your name. Because now, they speak it like a warning. Not a memory, but a movement.